It is the year 2412. Humans have terraformed much of the solar system. In their continuing search for colonies and resources, mankind discover the Velikan and Jaldari, intelligent alien races who are native to the nearby Dela and Hasali systems.
Mace Griffin Bounty Hunter is one of those games I think where you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't like it. Most of the people I've spoken to reminisce fondly about playing it on whatever console they owned back in the day, but few people ever seem to talk about its PC port. PC ports for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox always seem to be pretty damn crappy, mostly because by this stage games were being developed for consoles first, with PC as an afterthought. I mean, look at a game like Red Faction 2 to see what I mean. So as a result, a lot of the time you got a port that had a lot of stripped back visual options and generally just felt like it was thrown together by a bunch of morons that didn't really care about the outcome. Mace Griffin also came out in 2003, around that time when the FPS genre was just making its next big leap in terms of graphics engines and technology. I still remember around that time how physics engines started becoming much more commonplace. In and around that period, we also had Doom 3, Half-Life 2 and Far Cry, which turned the industry on its head. So how did Mace Griffin, a game about going around shooting lots of generic looking aliens, fare? Well, let's find out.
Right. How do you want to do this?
Now look, first things first, if you're even thinking about playing this game on the PC, you're gonna need to get it running at 60 FPS and ideally in widescreen. By default, the highest resolution this game goes is 1024 by 768 and it seems to be locked at like 30 frames per second with some pretty hefty input delay. Overall, it just makes the game look like shit and it feels like you're playing it underwater. I managed to limp through the prologue mission like this before giving up and figuring out how to get it running properly, and the difference, I have to say, is night and day. And it makes the difference from it being a game that feels horrible and delayed to a game that feels smooth and responsive. It's not an amazing looking game or anything, but the increased fidelity makes it much easier to see what you're shooting at, and a lot less like making everything else look like it's been smeared with Vaseline. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, the story in Mace Griffin is that you're playing as the eponymous bounty hunter, voiced by Henry Rollins.
People call me Ranger.
Anyway, in the prologue mission, Mace is betrayed by someone for some reason and then sent to jail.
Haven't you clowns listened to a word I said? It was a setup. They were waiting for us.
After which, upon his release, he becomes a bounty hunter and starts taking various assignments across the Vagner System. Now, these missions involve you shooting either other humans, space gorillas, or space lizards. Most of these missions aren't connected to one another on the surface, but there is an underlying plot here which also ties in with the events surrounding Mace's arrest and his former commanding officer, a guy named Richter. And can we just take a moment to appreciate the villain's name is Richter?
See you at the party, Richter!
Anyway, gameplay wise, Mace Griffin was kind of unique at the time for having this combination of shooting on foot and shooting in space, and there being a seamless transition between both styles. What you could do, and what I think is still one of the coolest parts of the game, is how you're able to often physically walk into Mace's ship, take off or land it, and engage in all these cool dogfights against other hostile spaceships. Just the simple act of being able to land the ship at the start of each mission or take off at the end of one, and the action of being able to walk up inside it, sit down in the cockpit and fly it makes it feel like it belongs to the player. Instead of it just showing up during cinematics and sitting in some kind of hangar or something, never being able to be interacted with. At the start of some missions, you can even go down to a little compartment in the ship and get extra ammo and weapons. When you're flying the ship, the combat's pretty basic stuff though. You've got a few different types of lasers and missiles, and you just kind of fly around getting attacked by a couple of dozen ships at once. You've got a shield that recharges when you're not taking damage and a health bar of sorts that shows the general condition that the ship's in. However, the game doesn't do a good job of explaining how the different lasers and missiles work, and some of them are really crappy. I think the most important thing during ship battles is to make good use of the select closest target button, otherwise the ship just seems to lock onto other ships at random, which isn't very helpful. Overall, the combat's not incredibly detailed or intricate, and it's about the absolute bare minimum it needs to be. But once you've found the setup that works the best for you, it's okay without being amazing or terrible. Despite being called a bounty hunter, I don't think Mace collects a single bounty the entire game. Instead, you're really just a gun for hire. Though I guess Mace Griffin gun for hire doesn't really have the same ring to it. What you really do is just go from mission to mission, given a briefing during a cinematic before you're off on your merry way. It's a bit of a shame they don't let you choose the order in which you complete these, as it would have given the game a much more open-ended feel if you could have flown from planet to planet in the order you chose, and it would have made the game feel less constricted.
I like the way you move, sweet thing.
Each mission is a contract in a sense, having Mace working for the Guild of Bounty Hunters in return for weapons and upgrades to his ship, because apparently paying bounty hunters with a criminal record is illegal according to the game. But paying them off with unlicensed weapons and having them fly around from planet to planet, killing dozens of people without answering to a higher authority is fine and dandy. Having said all of that, the shooting is pretty standard fare. You know what I mean? You aim at something, you press the fire button, and then that thing dies. Some of the weapons are projectile based and require a bit more strategy, and headshots are expectedly more damaging than body shots. The bread and butter of the shooting early on is the heavy machine gun, which is more of a minigun than a machine gun with rotating barrels that speed up the longer you fire, at the cost of increased recoil and less accuracy, though half the time you're shooting something at closer range, which kind of negates these effects. It's also got a grenade launcher as an alternate fire, as any good machine gun in an FPS game should. All in all, this thing's not too bad and it's pretty fun to use, and I like the sound it makes when the barrels speed up. There's also a plasma gun, which I guess is just like a heavier, more damaging version of the machine gun, firing out plasma projectiles much more accurately and doing some pretty decent damage as long as you're aiming for an enemy's head, and this is the go-to gun for the second half of the game. As you'd expect, there's a sniper rifle with a scope, handy for taking out enemies from long range and ideal for those headshots which usually kill most enemies in a single hit. The most overpowered gun in the game though is the shot cannon, which I think looks a little bit like the glue-on gun in Half-Life. Kills pretty much every enemy in a single hit. However, I'd say the rocket launcher is a bit of a disappointment. For starters, it looks like a Nerf gun, but it has a really low ammo capacity and the projectiles just move really slowly. Overall, it's just not all that much fun. It just doesn't have that kind of raw destructive power that you get from other rocket launchers in similar games. I think the fact too the game is practically devoid of any kind of blood and gore makes it feel a bit boring to use as well. Fire a rocket at a group of bad guys and they all just kind of keel over and die. Not a single drop of blood is shed, and it's a damn shame. I just never found myself using the two grenade types either, mostly because you have to switch to them to throw them instead of there being some kind of grenade throw button. But the shotgun is where they really shit the bed. Now if you know me, you know I like a good shotgun in my FPS games, and no self-respecting first-person shooter should go without one. Mace Griffin has one which looks like the assault rifle from Halo and it sounds good. The only problem is just how it works. So what it does in Mace Griffin a lot of the time is instead of outright killing an enemy, it instead knocks them on their ass. And then after a second or two, they'll just get right back up and keep firing. Now I learned how to tell they were going to do this because usually when they fall backwards, they're still alive, but if they fall forward, then they're dead. Now look, that might sound fine, except this happens regardless of whether or not you're shooting point blank range or not. Here's the way I look at it. A point blank range blast from a shotgun should, in most cases, kill an enemy outright. If they've got some kind of energy shield, as most enemies in this game do, then the first shot should destroy the shield, but the second shot should kill them. What happens here instead is that enemies will get knocked down, then slowly get up, at which point a second or third shot will do the job of sending them to pasture. And it's just incredibly tedious when you're fighting like 4 or 5 bad guys at once and have to worry about who's dead and who's going to get back up again. Now you can use the alternate fire to kill someone quickly, but it uses up multiple shells at a time, which will drain your ammo super quickly. It just kind of ruins what's otherwise a pretty good sounding, looking and feeling shotgun. Another thing that brings my piss to a boil are the checkpoints. Now look, I get that not every single FPS game can have a quick save feature, and I'm not condoning mashing that quick save button every time you kill an enemy, but if you're going to be using a checkpoint system, they need to be put in with some kind of modicum of fairness. I really hate some of the checkpoints in this game. They're so few and far between at times, it's a goddamn joke. Like in what I think is one of the worst missions in the game, you've got to shoot your way through this large city to find, protect, and then escort this NPC. And the amount of stuff you have to do in between getting a merciful checkpoint is just cruel. Now I know this kind of system was commonplace back then, and that might be the case, but it really does highlight how archaic the game can be at times. And I just don't enjoy having to replay 10-minute segments over and over. In almost every single mission, you're on some kind of timer to complete some kind of objective, and if you fail that objective outright, you'll have to restart the entire mission. And it's just a lame way of making the game more challenging, something it sure doesn't need help doing. I mean, it's a pretty damn challenging game to begin with, not that that's a bad thing. Getting through a lot of the trickier missions in this game, I often got through by the skin of my teeth, and even with the advantage of a smooth frame rate, a keyboard and a mouse setup, I had a hell of a time at certain points. Especially during some of the ship battles where everyone just gangs up on you and blows the piss out of you. Enemy AI seems to go from being either really intelligent to being completely brain dead, and it seems the further away from you they are, the dumber they are. Like the sniper enemies, for instance, will just stand out right in the open, often not even firing at you, leaving them wide open to have a lobotomy from your sniper rifle. I can't even imagine trying to play this game in its original state, or even worse, trying to play it on a console. Like the amount of times, for instance, you're having to use the sniper rifle to take out enemies from a really long distance, which is easy on the PC, but it just would be absolute hell on a controller. They say that brevity is the soul of wit. Well, you know what? Brevity is also the soul of good level design. And I always felt that playing Mace Griffin, that certain missions went on just a little bit too long. The second proper mission in the game, for instance, took me over an hour, and it often feels like it's dragging its feet. Often you'll get to the point where things feel like they're wrapping up, then you have to get back in your ship and shoot down another couple dozen enemies before yet another tedious on-foot section. Mace Griffin's pretty standard length for FPS games of that era, so you're looking at anywhere from 8 to 15 hours to complete, but a lot of that feels kind of tiresome. And I think if the missions were tightened down a bit, it would have a really good pace and be a lot better off for it. Everyone I've spoken to about this game looks back on it pretty fondly, and they say they remember playing it with their dad or their younger brother. You know, they'd play it when they got home from school and all that kind of thing, and it's definitely more of a cult classic than anything else. Is it a classic though? Well, no, not really, but when it does deliver the goods, seldom as that may be, you know what? It's still a pretty fun game. There is a bit of fun to be had with it, and it's also pretty cool for the fact that it's got Henry Rollins doing the main character, so I'd say if you're keen to check it out, go for it. I got my copy off eBay for 10 buckaroos, and that's damn good value. And just be prepared that if you want to try this thing out on the PC, it's going to be a bumpy ride to get it working properly.
See you at the party, Richter!